Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Other Side of Addiction. I am your host, Al Richards. We got another really good show for you guys today. Today, our topic is experience, strength, and hope. And I think this is something that just not those who are in long-term recovery or just starting their journey in recovery. I think this message is for everyone. And I mean everyone, because life has a way of punching us in the gut, man, over and over and over. And if you don't have those three things, it leads you down a pretty dark path. So our guest today is Austin Roderick. Austin, thank you so much, buddy, for being here. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you for having me on. I'm excited.
Absolutely, and it was a pleasure getting a chance to see you yesterday. You were on one of our live ones yesterday, and you kind of popped in to do a little testimonial. And I was going to say something, but we didn't get a chance. But again, yeah, just thank you for being here, man. Really appreciate you.
No, absolutely. Thank you.
So, right before the show, we were talking about a message, right? And it's a question I ask all our guests. You know, what's your main message, and what do you want our listeners to gain? And for both those questions, you said the same thing: the experience, the strength, and hope. Why is that?
Because I don't have anything super crazy to share other than my experience, and I think there's a lot of hope in that through my experience. And I got sober when I was 22, and I tried to get sober before that. But my experience being in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and working in the treatment industry is that it's very rare that you see a 22-year-old get and stay sober for over a year.
Yeah.
So
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 just
oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
no, go ahead.
So your addiction, did it start at an early age? Because a lot of our guests that come on the show, it it took me a while to realize it. And I don't know how many shows I finally had under my belt. And I'm like, my gosh, it seems like the addiction starts right around puberty. It's like around the 12, 13, 14 years of age.
Yeah, and I used cannabis and alcohol for the first time when I was 14. And prior to that, like liquor was but a symptom. And that's really as blunt as I can be about it. Like I can share a little bit about my experience. So I'm adopted, right? And I was adopted into an all white home and was loved by everybody. And it was never a lack of love or I had to go without. Everything was provided for me, and I was very fortunate in that way. But I I had something inside of me that that was just broken, right? Like I had a God-sized hole that I filled with anything and everything. And when I was younger, I stole a lot, right? And fast forward to being in recovery and with the things that I know now, liquor is but a symptom, and drugs and alcohol were my solution. And so prior to putting substances in my body, I was a terror. I was a little menace, and I ended up I broke into like 13 of my neighbors' garages when I was 12 years old. And I took car keys and I took garage door openers and I took BB guns and I'm not even tall enough to reach the pedals in a car. But that's how I acted out before I started using drugs and alcohol.
You probably know now, not knowing then, what was the reason for the acting out? Was it because now you're old enough to realize that, you know, eh, and I hope I'm not saying this in a bad way, because some of our guests have come on and shared this, like they felt abandoned, like their real parents or their mom or their dad, however their situation was, abandoned them, like they didn't want them, even though you were coming, the people who adopted you loved you, right? And it was a loving family. Do you think that was kind of where the black hole was starting?
Well, I for one, I just didn't feel okay inside.
Okay.
And I had that with me my whole life, and it would come out the most or flare up the most at family events. And I'd go and I'd be with all my cousins, and I have a big family. And I would see resemblances with them that I never had. And I was always very envious of that. But it wasn't that I wasn't loved. Like I was very loved, and it was never from a lack of love. It was just from not feeling okay and having some envy in me.
Yeah. Again, that goes to show why people fall into any type of addiction, right? Because I mean, the brain fires the exact same way. It doesn't matter what the addiction is, it fires the exact same way. It's like I was talking on our first show. That's one of the missions we have on the other side of addiction is to get rid of that stigma, right? Because people think it was just the drugs and the alcohol. Yeah, and you've even said it here. Basically, it's just our band-aid, right? It's just something to mask our feelings. And especially when we're at such a young age, we're not understanding what the hell these feelings are, man. I mean, they're just coming at us, and how the heck are we supposed to cope with something we don't understand?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You know, I found out in my early 50s that I was young when I was in my 50s. Now I'm going to be 60 next month.
Wow.
And here it is. It was kept a secret from me, from my whole family. Now, my mom is my mom. However, the guy that I called my dad all my life was not my real dad. And I was just flipping floored. I'm like, you've got to be kidding me.
Sure.
And my daughter and I, basically, I can't say she did the majority of the research. And I was just floored away. I found out who my real father was, didn't get a chance to meet him because he had passed away in 2009. Didn't even meet the man. I
Yeah.
did find some things out about him, who he was. He grew up in the same community my parents grew up in, which was an old coal mining town, Price, Helper, Kenilworth area,
Sure.
and I was just shocked, but also it opened up some windows per se, because it made me realize why I was treated the way that I was treated. Because my brother and my sister were treated completely different than the way I was treated. And I never could understand, and I always felt like it doesn't matter what I do, it's not ever going to be good enough.
Sure.
And yeah, it's just a hard one to take. I didn't even know really what to think of it. Here I am in my freaking 50s and I'm just finding this out. What a shock.
Yeah, I can't imagine what that was like for you. Right. And I don't know, would you have had a desire to meet him?
I believe so. Yeah. And it's crazy because I had an opportunity to meet his wife. Well, I guess I could have made the opportunity. That's how I need to say it,
Sure.
because she still lived there. And to come to find out, I've got a brother, one of his sons that's in Wyoming, a daughter that still lives there in the Price area. And I thought, man, do I reach out? Do I reach out and schedule a meeting? And, I'm like, well, I don't want him to think I'm coming to want money or anything like that, right? Because some people could perceive that. It's just to learn a little bit more about who my dad was, as an
Yeah.
individual.
Yeah, and I can speak to some of that from my experience,
Yeah.
right? So I have two brothers and a sister, and my mom and dad, like my mom and dad that I was raised with, and who I
Hmm.
call my mom and dad, and they are my mom and dad. My dad was married twice, so my sister's from his first marriage, and so she's the only girl. She's amazing, love her. Have two beautiful nieces, and they're just the best. Um, and then my older brother, right, and he was adopted from LA because my mom couldn't have kids. So her appendix ruptured when she was a young girl and left too much scar tissue to be able to have kids. And then my little brother, we have the same birth mom. And putting us side by side, you would never, ever in a million years know that.
Huh.
So me and my younger brother were 4 years apart. And growing up, he always had this strong desire to want to meet our biological parents. And I had this resentment because of the things I knew. So when I was taken by DCFS when I was a baby, because my biological mom left me in my crib for days at a time screaming.
Oh my goodness.
Right. So that's how I was taken into the system and was adopted, and my parents found out about me at a University of Utah game. I'm a Utah baby through and through. And my little brother just had this desire that I didn't have, um, so much with my biological mom. Like I've kind of always wanted to meet my biological dad, and I can't find anything on him other than what I think is his name, right? From what I've been told, but I can't find Facebook profile. I can't find anything, any records that this man even existed. But my little brother, he was taken straight from the hospital because he was born with so much stuff in his system, and I was very resentful of that for him. Like I was carrying a resentment for my little brother, from like, once again from my experience. And I have a 8-year-old son, and he's the highlight of my life, best thing that ever happened to me. And when I found out I was going to be a dad, like talk about my crash of 1929, right? Um, the book explains it. The stock market crashed. Bill didn't draw sober breath, didn't work a job 5 years, you know. And my crash was when I found out I was going to be a dad, because I couldn't wrap my head around it. I didn't think I'd be any good at it, and was just terrified. And so it was at that point where I really dove heavy into substances, right? Meth, heroin, Xanax, alcohol, like you name it. I was doing it in large amounts, and it took me 4 years, right, to really figure it out, because I was dabbling with the substances before that, but I really dove head deep into a pool without water when I found out I was going to be a dad. And got sober when my son was about 18 months old. And I can't understand how you can do that twice. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like I understand that it happens, and it definitely happened, and it happened with me and my biological mom. But never in a million years would I ever subject another child to that. Right? I would never subject myself to that again.
Yeah.
Because that's a low place when you have a kid that you can't see, um, and everything around you has crumbled to the ground, right? Um,
You know,
so
it's
that
go ahead. No,
no, go ahead.
go ahead.
No,
I
yeah.
I'm just thinking, because the kids, like yourself, when you and your brother were the kids, you guys had no choice, right? You're counting on an adult to take care of you and help direct you. And when they're gone, you didn't pick that, right? You didn't pick that life to start going down. And so many people, and there are some that, God bless them, that they just, the light bulb doesn't go off, or I guess I cannot say that. It's just that there's the claws in them are just so deep. It's hard for them to get out, right? People, individuals like yourself, Austin, and a lot of other guests that we've had on the show, you guys have broke the chain. You guys have literally broke the chain, because 18 months, your son, unless you talk to your son about it, won't know where you were at in your life at that time, right? Because he was
Yeah.
so young. All he sees is this amazing man that's his father right now. And you've broken that freaking chain, because if you would have stayed in it, that link is going to stay tight, and there's a good opportunity now that he's going to be the next link in that chain.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's just so hard. And again, it's people don't understand the past of other individuals. Yeah, it's, and I'm just as guilty of it. I'm just as flipping guilty of it, of making my comments underneath my breath or with my spouse or something about, seeing someone that's all high downtown or drunk or living underneath a tarp, and now that I've put myself into the recovery community, holy crap, has it opened my eyes in
Yeah.
so many ways.
Yeah. And it's crazy because there's times where I'm driving around with my girlfriend or friends that don't use drugs. And you drive past the 7-Eleven and you got two guys there and it's like, oh yeah, that's a drug deal. And you tell them that and they're like, no. And I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's definitely what's happening. And I've been that dude that's homeless. I've been that dude that stayed on couches. And I've been that dude without a place to go because that's the way I made it. Right. Um, and I don't wish that on anybody. Right. Like, talk about being lonely, talk about feeling alone, talk about rock bottom.
Yeah.
Right. And the thing about rock bottoms is they have trap doors and basements and it really stops when you keep digging. Like, there were some rock bottoms that I hit that I thought were the very bottom. And fast forward 30, 60, 90 days and it's way deeper than I thought it was.
Yeah, we've had a lot of our guests say that, right? When someone says they hit rock bottom, it's like, really, was it your rock bottom? Because you can go further, right? You got the shovel in your hand. You can just keep digging. You can dig as long as you want. And there is no bottom until you drop that damn shovel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a section in the big book and it's like the only page that I know of that's unnumbered. And it's the "We Stopped in Time" section where the bottom comes up and hits you. And thank God we could see it. And so that's something I like to touch on a lot because working in the treatment industry, I deal with a lot of people that maybe haven't experienced the same bottom I have, or that you have, or that the next guy or next girl has. Um, but those feelings, those emotions, are the same,
Yeah.
right? The experience around them, it could be astronomically different. But what lonely feels like to me and what lonely feels like to the next guy, like, lonely is lonely.
Yeah.
Empty is empty. Um, yeah.
Yeah.
So I always love to touch on that because I think that's so big for young people getting sober. It's like, hey, like, you don't have to go to jail 11 times. You don't have to not see your son.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, it's a good way of putting it, right? Lonely is lonely and empty is empty. And it's even hard for us on the other side as well, or the individuals even on the other side, because when they're seeing someone that they love and they care about slowly killing themselves and drifting further and further away, the pain that's on their side is, yeah. I like to say that, I got drugged down the same rabbit hole that my wife was going down. And I had a friend of mine, and a lot of our listeners have heard me say this many times, and I say it over and over because he was so right. And it's that I ended up becoming addicted to my wife's addiction. It consumed my life, and not understanding it, even though I battled my own 8-year weekend, every Friday and Saturday night, cocaine and alcohol use in the 2000s, early 2000s. I didn't look at myself as an addict. I still held my job. I went to work every day. I didn't miss work, you know, and I hid it from my wife, who's my wife now. We dated for 3 years. She had no clue I was snorting cocaine, no clue. she knew I was drinking, and she couldn't figure out how I could drink so much. And well, because you learn how to level yourself out, right? When you start to get too buzzed on the cocaine, you drink a little more alcohol. When you start feeling too drunk, you snort a few more lines, and you play
Yeah,
that balancing act all night long. And yeah, however, it just took me such down a dark, dark hole with her because I didn't understand addiction, and so many of us out there think we do. And I still don't understand it fully. The reason why is because I've not walked in those shoes, right? I've not been in your shoes, Austin. I've not been in my wife's shoes. I've not been in all our other guest shoes at all because the stories are like the same, but the journeys are completely different.
absolutely.
And until you walk in those shoes, you have no clue. So when someone asks me, "Oh, you've been doing this show for 2 years now, you probably understand addiction really well." No, I don't. I understand it a lot more. And I don't think I'll ever understand it 100% because I've not walked down that path. However, I've got more tools in my pouch to help me understand, right? So if my wife just happens to go in the opposite direction from where she's at least I know where to go now and how to handle things properly. Where before I did the same thing over and over and over for 7 years with the same result, and it was zero. It didn't get me anywhere
Yeah,
except more angry, right?
yeah, and I love that you say that because that's something I talk about frequently. And God forbid that my son ever goes down the same path I did. But if he ever does, who better to help him than his dad,
Yeah.
right? And I can help him in ways that my parents weren't able to help me. You know, like I created so much shame within my family system, and I remember going to my parents' house for Christmas or something like that was the only time I really ever saw anybody in my family when I was using drugs is Thanksgiving or Christmas. And it's because they didn't want to celebrate those holidays without me. You know, like they wanted us all to be there if we could be there. And I remember every time I saw my dad, he would say, "When are you gonna get your shit together?" And I'd look at him and I don't know, Dad.
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess maybe someday if I'm lucky, but I don't know. I don't have an answer for that. But he would ask me that same question, and he'd always follow it up with, "When you're ready, I'll help you." You know, and outside of being able to help me financially, there wasn't a lot that my parents could do,
Yeah.
other than getting me into a center that understood addiction and could help me through it, the guilt and the shame and all the turmoil that comes with being a drug addict, right? And very very fortunate in that way. I have friends that don't have that same resource that I had, and some of them may be forever stuck. And it doesn't matter how much I try to help or what I do, until they're ready, they're going to stay stuck.
Yeah.
And I just grew up in a different way to where when I was ready, like the help was available.
Yeah. And you said the key one right there. It's when you're ready, right? Because it is up to the individual. And when you first said that your dad would look at you and say, "When are you going to get your shit together?" I'm thinking, well, that's definitely a wrong thing for us to say, right? Because I would say the same thing. However, he also came back when it was like, "When you are, I'm here for you."
Yeah,
And I found that to be so huge for my wife, right? Because you mentioned the guilt and the shame. My wife felt so guilty with what she was doing to us and what she was doing to herself. And then the shame of, I promise I'm going to be done. And, promise after promise after promise after promise. And you finally get to where you just like, yeah, whatever. and we don't realize, even being on the other side, we have boundaries just like the person that's going through the addiction or going in the recovery has boundaries. We have triggers just like they have triggers, and we don't understand it. And once we start learning those tools, I mean, it's like when my wife came out of the recovery for the very last time, and she says, I feel like you're moving on with your life without me. And I says, I am, because I'm done doing this. I cannot continue to go down this path. And I says, however, if you want to jump on this train with me and you want to stay sober, I want you next to me. And with what happened to her the last time she got drunk, and just me using those words, that's what it took.
Yeah.
Knowing that I had forgiven her, that was gone. That was in the past. I still have my triggers. There's still certain things where I'm like, oh crap, she's drinking again, right? And it's just a trigger, is all it is. And she's not. Tomorrow, the 9th, she'll be 30 months sober tomorrow.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's crazy because we're looking for the support. However, that support is a touchy line when we're dealing with our loved one that's battling that addiction. I have definitely found that out. I had a friend of mine who I used to know from the Chamber of Commerce, and she goes, hey, I got a good friend that lives in Idaho, and her son does the rodeo, and he's up in Wyoming, and he's really getting into the alcohol really bad, and she doesn't know what to do. Would you talk with her? And I said, yeah, I'd be more than happy to speak with her. And she called me, and she goes, Al, I've watched your show, and she's like, what can I do to help my son? I said, can I be straight up honest with you? And she says, yeah. And I says, nothing. I says, you can tell him you love him. You can tell him you miss him. You can tell him you're going to be there for him whenever he decides. But I'm like, the choice is his. There's
Yeah.
nothing you can do. He's not that little kid where when you see your baby walking towards a glass coffee table and he's still learning how to walk, or she is, and you don't want them to fall and hit their head. You can't grab them and maneuver them, right? Or like one of those robots that do their thing and hit the wall and move off to another side. That doesn't happen, right? All you can do is, and as hard as it is sit and watch him and just let him know how much you care, and that you
Yeah.
will be there for him. Like what your dad said, I'll be here for you when you're ready. And that means the world, right?
Yeah, and it's hard because in the moment of him saying, when are you going to get your shit together, you the when you're ready, I'll help you, like you miss that.
Yeah.
Right. And looking back, like I recognize that, but in the moment, I don't know that I ever heard him actually say that. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Because other guests have said the same thing. Yeah.
And and just putting my whole family through the ringer. Like my mom, she's a saint, best woman I've ever known. And it was actually pretty recent, within the last year, where she finally told me. She said, I think you were about 4 years sober, when I could finally go to sleep again and not have to worry about you. And knowing that you were actually on this path and you were going to stay on this path, because my pattern was I'd go to jail, I'd make these promises that things were going to be different, and they weren't different. And that's one of those bottoms for me, right?
Yeah.
Like this last time I was in jail, I was on the phone with my son's mom, and I put her through the ringer too, right? And I'm like begging her basically, like it's gonna be different this time. It's gonna be different. You always say that. Click, phone hangs up. And a big tool for me is I write poetry. I write music. And I went back to my cell, and the poem that I started writing was what I wish you understood, but hope you never understand. Um, because I spent so much time hitting my head on this metaphorical brick wall, right? Of why don't you get it? If you understood it, you'd use to. And in that moment, it was the first time in my entire life where I was able to look at it through a different lens of thank God you don't understand it. Like, thank God, because in order to understand what I'm talking about, you had to have gone through what everybody else has to go through in treatment or AA, right? Um, and it was the same for my mom and dad too. Like they didn't get it, and thank God they didn't get it. You know. But yeah, rewind a little bit to that moment. That last time I was in jail and I made those promises was probably the first time I meant it with everything in me. Where no, it's gonna actually be different this time. And sure enough, you get out and drugs are put in front of you. And what do you do when you're an addict? You use drugs because you don't have a solution. And it wasn't different, and that broke me, Al. Like I was so messed up in the head in that moment because I'm pretty good at when I put my mind to something, like I'm gonna get it done. I'm gonna take care of it, and this was the one thing that I couldn't take care of. Right? It was eating my lunch every day, and, and yeah, like I meant it with everything in me, and and it was different. Like it was different for about 30 days, and I thought I had a grip on it, but sure enough, got a job, passed a drug test. I was in jail for like 90 days this last time I was in there, and so I got out, passed the drug test, got a job, and and then I had this idea that I was going to go sell a pound of weed because I needed more money. And my buddy that I went and sold it to, he had meth, and I used it. And I had my son's mom's car, and she's blowing my phone up, and I'm not answering because that shame, right, and that guilt, and I'm like, I can't believe that I'm here again, but here I am. And I remember showing up to her apartment the next morning at like probably 5 in the morning, and she was just waiting for me. Um, she ended up kicking me out, and it was the first time in a long time where my parents were like, "Hey, come home, like come home." And it was so I got sober in August, and this was probably in June of 2016. And so that last summer I spent getting loaded in my parents' basement.
Wow.
And I think, and I should probably ask them because I don't have an exact answer to this question, but I've always kind of wondered it. Why then did they say, "Hey, come home"? Because I stole all their stuff. No one wanted me around, and prior to me moving back in, they would follow me around their whole house because everywhere I went, I would find something to steal to get more dope, and or to get more money or whatever, right? The vicious cycle of one more or one last time, right? But it's never one last time. And yeah, they were like, "Come home." So I went home and got loaded in the basement. And really the only answer I have to that is that I was that close, like that close to them losing their son, like forever. I was right on the cusp of I'm gone, and they're gonna have to bury their kid, or their kid's going to prison for a long time. And yeah, so that's really the only answer I have for that, and I'll have to ask them that. Maybe I'll call them when we get off the podcast and get their
Yeah.
thoughts because I'm curious. And I get to do that today. Like I have a good enough relationship with my parents today that I can call them on the phone and we don't fight. And if you would have told me 7 years ago that was possible, I would have told you that you were higher than the price of gas. You know,
Yeah. Wow. Thanks for sharing that. I mean, that's as you're sitting there saying that you need to ask them. And I'm a very spiritual person, okay? Not so much religious, just more spiritual. And I'm just picturing maybe that was a calling for them. Maybe something just a message was given to them that that's what they needed to do, even though they knew what was probably going to happen. Because I'm a big believer. There's no coincidences. Everything happens for a reason. You meet people for a reason. You go places for a reason. I mean, it's all divine in my eyes. That's just how I believe, right? It's just all divine. So I'm curious now too. You even have me curious. It's like I just wonder, yeah, because a lot of people have asked me, how the hell did you stay with your wife as long as you did? Because it's different when it's your child, right? Your parents couldn't divorce you,
Sure.
right? You
Absolutely.
love you. Even though they may not be your blood, but they are in all sense. They raised you, right? You are their freaking child, and they love the world out of you. And when it comes to our spouses, I mean, I kicked my wife out on the streets many times because I thought I was going to have peace. I couldn't handle it. So I'm like, you get the hell out of here. And then I'd be up all night because I was afraid someone was going to grab her and rape her because she was so flipping drunk all the time. There were many
Yeah.
times she'd come knocking on the door. I'm hungry. Pine needles in her hair, because she slept underneath a freaking pine tree and out all night. And gosh, it's so hard even for me because there was times I don't know where I freaking made food, made dinner, and put tinfoil out and set it out on the freaking porch of our apartment. I don't want to see you come and get it. It's like feeding my dog.
Yeah.
And I was feeling guilty of it too, because of how I was handling things, not knowing how else to handle. So it's just a tough one. It's just all the way around tough. And it's different when it's your spouse, but when it's your child, I won't even go there. When they call me up, and even like that lady with her son, like this is a whole different ballpark. I can tell you the things I did wrong and things I did right with my spouse. I can't say it's the same thing for your child because I really don't believe it is the same thing.
Yeah.
It's a whole different drink, right? You're going from fruit punch to lemonade, or so I don't know. There's
Yeah.
a big difference.
Water to milk.
Water and milk. There you go, right? Yeah.
You
Just
know.
I don't know how to answer that, and I won't. However, I've been able to build some really awesome resources by doing this. And I know people who I can say, look, I know someone that you could talk to that could probably help you more than I can. And it's cool to be able to have those resources now to help them out. Now, earlier in the show, you said now you're helping individuals. So do you work for a recovery center?
I do. I kind of I went through when I went to treatment this last time. I went to Renaissance Ranch, and that's where I got sober. And and rewind a little bit, Al, to when I was living in my parents' basement, right? And they're like, "How can we help you? How can we?" And I'm like, "You can't. Like I'm hopeless. There's nothing you can do for me." And I had a cousin that also struggled with addiction, struggles with addiction, and has 8 or 9 years sober, I think. And she was talking to my mom, "Hey, you got to get him to the ranch. You got to get him to the ranch. You got to get him, like whatever you do, you got to get him to the ranch." And been to treatment prior. Like I went to the Pines. It's Wasatch Crest now, but I went there when it was the Pines, like when they first opened, and was released from jail to go to treatment. And the only thing I cared about was, can I smoke there, and how's the food,
Sounds
you
like my
know,
wife.
right? And yeah, so I that obviously didn't work for me, and so my cousin's like, you got to get him there. And so I ended up going there, and it was the first time in a long time where I felt listened to. Um, and I expected to go see somebody in a suit and a tie and telling me, hey, like you need to do this and that if you're going to get sober. And that wasn't what my experience was at all. Dude had a LA tattoo on his neck and actually listened to what I had to say. And so I made the decision to go there with a lot of encouragement from my mom, because I was like, no, I don't think I'm ready. I think I'm just going to move to California. And one of the things he said to me was, wherever you go, there you are. So if you want to go out to California, let's figure this out first. And then you go out to California. Never ended up out in California, obviously. But yeah, that dude saved my life. And all he did was be himself. And yeah, so got sober at Renaissance Ranch in 2016. And I started working there the following, so that was in August of 2016. Started working there in July of 2017. And then I worked at the ranch for, I think it was about 3 years until January of 2020 is when I started, or is when I got laid off. Right, so they closed multiple locations and laid half their employees off, and I was just on the list of ones that made it.
Right.
And so I'm like asking myself, like, do I want to stay in the industry? Like, what do I want to do? And I went and interviewed at a couple different places, and I interviewed with the Phoenix Recovery Center. And I'm not like I'm a pretty emotional dude. The tears fly sometimes, and that's kind of me, right?
It's all right. I'm in the same swimming pool with you, buddy. Yeah, I'm a baby sometimes.
Yeah, and I'm having this interview with my boss, right? And we're like both crying, and I'm like, that's where I have to go. Talk about nothing happening by mistake, right?
Right.
The divine plan, or whatever you want to call it, right? In that moment, that was exactly where I needed to be. So I've been here at the Phoenix Recovery Center ever since in a different role than I had at the ranch. At the ranch, I was doing recovery coaching, one-on-one stuff with the dudes, and helping facilitate groups and doing a lot of sober living stuff. So that's what I did at Renaissance Ranch, and here at the Phoenix, I do admissions. So I'm doing what that guy did for me when I went to the ranch, right? And I get to be that vessel. I get to be that person that listens, and helps to try to find a solution if we're not the appropriate facility for that person. And I love it, and I'm very grateful for this opportunity that I have to be able to do this.
Wow.
Yeah, so I'm at the Phoenix. I've been here since February of 2020. So just celebrated 3 years here in February, and it's crazy to be employable. And the ranch showed me that I was able to be employable long term, because I'd had so many jobs where it's like, hey, like I'm just gonna work here long enough to buy a pound of weed. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
And like I'd had some jobs before that, but it was the ranch that really was like, hey, like you can work somewhere for longer than a few months, and that's transpired into my experience here at the Phoenix, and it's just been part of the journey, and I love it most days. Most days I love it, and
Yeah.
there's some days that I don't love it, but
and it's first of all, thank you for what you do, Austin. I mean,
thank you.
seriously, this is where I get emotional sometimes. You guys are the angels in my eyes, right? When Jesus started walking the earth and spreading the word, he picked his disciples, and none of his disciples were perfect. He picked the imperfect ones, and there was a reason behind that, right? I look at those who are in long-term recovery and working in recovery centers. That's how I see them. That, and again, this is just how my vision looks like, because you guys understand it and you've lived it, and to be able to be there on the other side and grab someone's hand and say, if you'll let me, I'm here by your side, and I'll help you walk through it, you know. And that, to me, that's just amazing. And so again, thank you for what you do and helping others. And, you know, every so I do a couple other things. This is what I want to do full time, right? I want to spend every freaking day in a studio interviewing people and getting out there as much as possible. And we've been pretty well blessed with getting out there in the recovery center or in the recovery community, and people to starting to know who we are. Uh, Two guys that I work with both went to Renaissance Ranch. Cap Summer Hayes is one of them. He does a ton of work. So if you know Cap, you know, I love the man to death. You know, he's our electrician for the work that we do. And then I've got Zach, who I do a lot of stuff with. And Zach just graduated a little over a year ago, you know, and he's not as active at Renaissance as Cap is. You know, Cap does a ton of stuff out there. My wife, Janan, went to Phoenix. I think she went to Phoenix twice. And it's crazy where it goes. You know, my wife Janan went to Odyssey House twice and got kicked out. You know, it wasn't a fit for her. Well, guess where she works as a CPSS? Odyssey House. Isn't that freaking crazy? You know, and she's like, I don't know if I'll be able to handle it because I couldn't stand the place. However, there's totally different people there now. And she loves what she's doing, and her goal is to work at USARA. That's her dream job, and she actually has an interview with them here, next week, or maybe it's tomorrow. Tomorrow's Friday, so I think it's tomorrow. She has an interview with them, and she's really, really excited. So it's crazy. It's crazy, like you said, where things go, and I believe you even said something. And for our listeners who, if you're looking at starting your journey in recovery, you know, there's some places that may not work for you, right? It just may not be a fit. Like I went to Al-Anon, and after the third meeting, I'm like, I am never going to show my face here again.
Yeah.
I'm not knocking them. It just wasn't a fit for me. And I went to a lot of the family stuff there at Phoenix. You know, I think it was every Thursday night or Wednesday night. I don't remember what it was. It was a while ago. I'd go in and sit down with family, and I was the only one that had a spouse. Everyone else there had their child that was going to the Phoenix, right?
Sure.
And it was okay. I got some stuff out of that. However, it still wasn't a fit for me. And just for those who are starting their journey, you know, if you go to a recovery place and it's not a fit, it doesn't mean that all of them are not a fit, right? You gotta go where what works for you. And
Yeah.
everyone's recovery journey is different, right? Their stories are the same, like I said earlier, but their recovery journey is different.
No, yeah, and when I first got sober, talk about God doing for me what I can't do for myself, right? Um, so I remember it was my first week in sober living, and how are we doing on time?
We're good, buddy. Yeah, we're good.
Okay. It was my first week in sober living, and I remember them telling me like, hey, like you got to go to this many meetings, you got to be here, here, and here, and I remember thinking to myself like, I can't do any of those things, right? Like I had put myself in a position to where I literally didn't believe that I could do anything anymore, and that I was like useless, and so I'm in sober living, and my parents, they dropped me off at rehab and went to Lake Powell, and I'm calling my mom and I'm like, hey, I'm leaving, like I'm sorry I let you down again, and this other dude that that he wasn't even living there at the time. He was just stopping by to get his softball cleats because he was moving out. And he took 5 minutes to talk to me. I couldn't tell you what he said or how he said it, but whatever he said changed my mind, and my mind was made up. So had he not showed up when he did, I for sure wouldn't be sitting here doing this podcast with you. My son probably wouldn't have a dad today, right? And yeah, it's just so interesting um, how things pan out, right?
Yeah.
And and going back to all those meetings that they said I needed to be at, like I went to a lot of um, CA meetings, went to a lot of AA meetings, went to some CMA meetings, and if I'm being honest, the one I probably fit the niche of the most was the CMA, right? Because
Wow.
I
Yeah.
was a meth user through and through. Like that was my poison, and I would just follow it up with some weed. And so I was one of those weird drug users that liked meth and weed together, but also the drug user that would use anything in front of them. But as I got more time sober, right, like AA has been where I want to be, right? Um, and I don't know why that is. There's just some presence about Alcoholics Anonymous that's different than other fellowships. I find myself when I go to CA meetings, I get anxiety because they're like really loud and um, don't don't love HA. I don't love CMA, and I'm not knocking that either, right? Like there's some people that's all that's all that they will go to, and
Yeah.
if that's all that they will go to, I'm so grateful that that's there for them. But for me, I've found my home in AA, right? And I was for sure, alcohol was for sure a part of my story, but it was usually when I was on probation, you know? Um, right?
Yeah.
It was never my first choice, um, to put it that way. But meth always was.
Wow. Well, we all, yeah, I've said this a couple times. We all have our own journey, right? And sometimes, sometimes I think the only way we put down the shovel is when somehow the shovel knocks us upside the head, wakes us up, and
Yeah.
makes us realize. I mean, it sounds like your son was a huge part of the blessing, of changing your mind. The gentleman that spoke to you at 5 minutes, for 5 minutes, for you not even to be able to remember what he said or how he said it, and it changed the way you looked at it, and you stayed. And again, it's my belief, man, that they're angels. It's just, we interviewed a lady out of Canada, and her daughter happened to be there, and she had already lost a brother to addiction, committed suicide, and her daughter was battling addiction, and it was hard, really hard. And her daughter got on and said, yeah, I got on a bus. I was all high and everything, and got on this bus, and I heard this voice behind me say, are you interested in going to a meeting with me? And she turned around, there's this guy there on this bus. Apparently he saw that she was high, and she's like, I don't know why, I just trusted this guy and I went to a meeting. And she goes, never saw the guy again, ever. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it was. And I think I titled the show The Angel on the Bus. And that was the beginning of her journey, right? Of becoming sober and clean. So you never know where it's going to come from. And there's some kind of tool there, there's something there that just, I don't know, that wakes us up. I guess, you know, it took me of losing my job of 24 years. You know, I lost my job of 24 years because I failed a drug test. Hadn't been drug tested in 15 years. You know, 15 freaking years I hadn't
Yeah.
been drug tested. And man, every Friday and Saturday, I'd work 13, 14-hour shifts Monday through Thursday, 8 hours on Friday because I was on the phone calling my dude up, you know, where can we meet? You know, picking up my little envelope because they did steal the envelopes back in those days, not the plastic bags. You know, pick up my cocaine, and is it enough to last me for Friday and Saturday, and go hit the liquor store or stop and grab some beer and go home, snort some lines, go out, do my yard work, and I'd be half liquored up by the time my wife got home from work, you know, but the yard
Yeah.
work immaculate because I did all my yard because I didn't want to spend my weekend doing yard work. I wanted to party, right?
Yeah.
So it's crazy what opens our eyes and what changes us, you know. So gosh, man, you know, just thank you so much, Austin, for taking time out of your day and being vulnerable and sharing a part of your life that, you know, so many of us really do want to forget, right? And I've asked some people if they'd come on the show, and they're just like, I don't want to relive it. And it's okay. I'm fine with it because that's their journey. It's not for me to say, no, you need to go this direction because that's their path. And others just come on and share their story, and it's hard because they're reliving a part of their life that really it's still there. It's always going to be there. However, they want to do their best to stay the hell away from it as far as possible, you know.
Sure.
So yeah, and again, thank you for what you do. And I just want to say, hey, thank you to to Austin Hammer as well, you know, for
Yeah.
introducing us. You know, I just want to say thank you, Austin. What an amazing individual. I met him at an event that I was invited to, and it was something like people who inspire Utahns or something like that. And I was invited to this, and one of my buddies come up to me and he goes, "Hey, I got someone you need to meet." And I went over and met Austin and his dad, Steve, I believe, and sat there and started shooting the crap with him. And Austin and I, man, we just connected like that and
Yeah.
started talking to me about some of the stuff. I'm like, dude, I got to have you on the show, man.
No, that dude, I've known him for more than half my life.
Wow.
He's been one of my best friends since we were in second grade, and and he's for sure been a rock for me. There was a time, I'll just share this quick story real quick about
All
Austin.
right. Okay.
Um, where it was when he was playing baseball in California, and I had went out there with my son's mom and her whole family to Newport, and it was just right around the time where I just happened to run out of math. And it wasn't funny at the time,
Yeah.
but they say pain plus time equals humor, right? And we just barely we drove the whole way to Newport, and as soon as we got there, that's when I fell asleep. And so she was so mad, and she's like, "You told me you were sober," and I was like, "I know, I'm not," you know. And we got into this huge fight, and I was like, "You know what? Pop the trunk." She popped the trunk, grabbed my duffel bag and my skateboard, and I'm skateboarding down the street in Newport. I'd never been to Newport. And I'm like, what am I doing? Like, what am I going to do? Like,
Right.
I'm not, it's not like it'll take me a couple hours to get home. Like, I'm like a couple states away from home.
Yeah.
And I called Austin, and sure enough, he answers. Right? He's always been one of those people that it doesn't matter how long we go without talking. When we talk, it's like we never stop talking. And called him, and I'm like, "How far are you from Newport?" And he's like, "About an hour and a half." And I was like, "I really need your help. Like, can you help me?" And he's like, "Yeah." Like he called an Uber. I didn't have any money, but he called an Uber, took this hour and a half long Uber drive to San Pedro, California, and spent like 3 or 4 days with him, sobering up on his couch. And he reminds me all the time that he knew I was going to figure it out. And it was from that moment of him looking at me on the couch like, Austin's going to get this. And I couldn't see it at the time, but he always saw that. Didn't matter what anybody else said, like, no, Austin's going to figure it out. So shout out Austin Hammer. I'd probably still be lost in Newport if it wasn't for him.
You'd still be riding that skateboard. I love it. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Now, and you and Austin do some stuff with a product that we talked about yesterday on the show, this Natty Addy, right? That really helps mood and energy and focus, and it's helping people with ADHD as well.
Yeah, it's been crazy for me. It's been super effective. It's got L-theanine, methylene blue, and caffeine in it, and just in very specific amounts. But it's increased my mood, it's increased my energy level, it's increased my focus, and I can't say enough good things about it. It's a product that I never thought would help me the way that it has.
Wow.
So,
well,
yeah,
I'm getting a bottle. So yeah, because Garrett was talking about yesterday. I don't know if you popped on before or after it. Garrett goes to the gym, and I go to the gym 5 days a week too. And he's like, man, it helps me so much. He goes, I got rid of all my pre-workout stuff, and I just take a couple capsules before I go to the gym. And within a half hour, I'm like, okay, man, I'm down with that. I'm going to give it a shot. So I'm also scheduling a meeting, and I don't know, hopefully you can make it for, oh my gosh, June. It's not next week, is the 14th. I think it's the 21st, June 21st. I think we're going to meet at 2:00. And there's a gentleman I'd like to introduce you guys to.
Okay.
And, I don't know if there's a fit, but yesterday during the show, something clicked, and I'm like, I got to introduce these guys. So I've already reached out to Chris and Austin and said, hey, man, mark it on your calendar. I think we'll meet at High Point Coffee in West Jordan off of 7800 South and Redwood Road. I'm a big supporter of Steve out there, and he's the one that was my first sponsor that helped get this show going, that started the show. And yeah, sit down and introduce you guys to him. And I don't know, maybe there's a fit. I just don't know. All I know is something told me that I needed to introduce you guys, and hope some good things come out of it.
Yeah, I'd love to be there for that.
Yeah. Okay. Is there one last thing you'd like to share? I know you probably got to get back to work, and I've got some things I got to do too before I head to my next appointment. Just, yeah, is there anything else you'd like to share before we sign off?
Just want to say thank you to you. Appreciate you having me on the show, and this opportunity to share a little bit about me and how I'm still here today. So
awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Let me know when you ask your mom and dad that question. I'm curious. You really have me quite curious. And if you would, please, Austin, ask them if they'd be willing to come on the show and talk about what their experience was like, right? Because I don't get a lot of people on the show that are on the other side, and we need more guests to come on and talk about it. So there's people out there that are going through what your parents have gone through, right? And maybe there's something they can share that will help. So yeah, if you would, please ask them, and feel free to give them my information, and I'd love to sit down and chat with them and have them on as a couple together. I think
I'll absolutely talk with them and see if that's something they'd be open to doing.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Guys, again, thank you, Austin, for everything, and the other Austin, Hammer. Thank you for the introduction. Greatly appreciate it. I want to say thank you to all our sponsors, all our guests co-hosts, Resilience Talk Network. Man, this show wouldn't be happening if it wasn't for you guys. If you hear something that you really like, please go out there and like and share and subscribe. Help us build this, because the more people that hear about it, and all it takes is saving one life, right? If we make a difference in one life, everything that our guests have gone through, things that I've gone through, has all made it worth it, right? I mean, it's made it worth it anyway, because it's really changed us as who we are as human beings. So, guys, remember this. We're going to end this show as we do every week. Remember, addiction is giving up everything for one thing, and recovery is giving up one thing for everything. We're out.